So, you recently released a report about the mobile network surveillance and censorship going on in Iran and kind of what that infrastructure looks like. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. At Citizen Lab, I was conducting, some other research, and the Intercept, reached out, basically that they had received a trove of documents, and when I say documents, it's literally, email, and there was, an entity, organization, a person, I won't say who it is, but that had gotten access into a mobile operator's email server and had been able to dig up years of email communications. And as part of those email communications, there was a discovery that there was a an organization called the CRA, which is the Communication Regulatory Authority of Iran. And what the CRA does is they basically act as, in the US you would say, an FCC, but they also have a bit of a law enforcement element to them as well. And as a part of their that this discovery process, in combing through all these emails, really brought forth some requirements that the Iran CRA had of all mobile network operators, that they must comply with what they call this sort of quote unquote legal intercept system. And that legal intercept system, as I started to dig into it more, was vast, and it included the ability for the Iran government essentially to monitor all communication. That may not surprise a lot of people, right? But the mere fact that it is extensive, that includes at will, they can surveil anyone's communication, from text messages to who's calling, call duration, calling what country, calling people, and then actively approve or deny someone's ability to buy a mobile subscription. What they don't want, we discovered, was if you have a phone in the US, you can buy 10, 20 phones. It doesn't matter, but there, they don't want people to have multiple phones. And you could probably understand, why, is they want to know who is communicating, and they want no, misunderstanding that, oh, it could have been my child, that's using, my phone. It's like, they don't allow that to happen. So if you try to, purchase another SIM card, say, boom, you will get denied. That's stated directly in the documents. Moreover, there's a control element as well. So, if they want to uh, take, Tom Kelly's phone, and they want to block, access to a certain site or a certain app, they have control, of the DPI infrastructure as well. So they can, enforce block. They can enforce uniform blocks. They can enforce blocks at a geographic level. So that level of control is there. They also can, switch your access network as well. So, they don't have 5G infrastructure yet, but, they can, take you from 4G or 3G down to 2G. Basically, your phone would be crawling. And that's done to suppress certain type of application communication. Using 2G with any kind of modern app is not going to work. But the user is not going to know that. They may think that there's just some network congestion. So that level of control and surveillance, down to specific localities or specific cell sites, and find out who are all the people that are at this particular location, because they know of all the cell IDs. That is something that democratic governments do not have direct access to. But in Iran, it is a requirement. You will not launch a mobile network unless you comply with all of their requirements, and they've built out a vast infrastructure to support that. And that was what the Intercept report, and then the follow-on report from Citizen Lab that I led, was really intended to expose a lot of that activity.
It sounded like too that they were using it for a spyware campaign, from what it sounded like. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I think this kind of goes back to what we discussed a little bit earlier, which is advanced attacks. And what I think is a common occurrence within Iran is being able to pinpoint people of interest, and doing that by examining the quite simply the data traffic patterns, and what looking merely at port level, right? Looking at IP ports and being able to look at destination IPs and sessions, and find out oh, you're trying to use Facebook, or whatever, going to a particular website. If you do that often enough, you begin to build a behavioral profile. And so what might be happening is they might be performing behavioral profiling of the users, identifying specific users, and maybe it's someone where they're not able to see their traffic, and that's because they might be using a Mozilla VPN, or any type of VPN for that matter, Signal. And because of that fact, they could then we found a lot of spyware within Iran as well, that's being distributed. And so that mechanism of using the mobile network as reconnaissance, and then targeting users and deploying spyware, we see a more frequency in that type of activity. And in fact, if you take a look, there are a number of stories about different types of spyware that are being deployed throughout Iran.
So I think, as far as the behavioral profiling goes, I know some of the privacy hawks here in the U.S. would say, how is it different from a lot of the big tech companies that essentially collect their information and profile you and sell it? I know recently there's been a lot of privacy laws that have kind of clamped down on that, but I know that would be kind of a common thing that a lot of people would say.
Yeah, I mean, yes, the data collection aspect, and looking at ad IDs, and being able to sort of monitor locations. I think that everybody should be aware of what they have on their phone, right? All the apps that are collecting this information, and uh, any app provider that is launching an app has to disclose these things. Otherwise it gets flagged during the app onboarding process on Apple Store and Google Store. So you really need to pay attention to that. And I think, to your point, there's a lot of sort of clampdown on that behavior, and certainly there were many stories about U.S. government agencies collecting that information. For folks that are really security conscious, they do pay attention to that, right? Or they'll turn off IDs, right? But I looking beyond the U.S., and looking to a lot of repressive countries, and there are many of them now, and they're starting to do more and more clampdowns on the use of VPNs. It's really kind of a troubling trend that I see. If you take a look at Turkey and India, you know, Pakistan. Some you would expect that to happen in some of these, but India, which frequently performs internet shutdowns. It's a really troubling trend that I see.
One thing, though, I think, as we kind of wrap up here, so a lot of our viewers are in countries in the Middle East, or in some of those countries that we either mentioned directly or indirectly. What would you say for them, like, the assumed vulnerabilities are, and what are the mitigations, if any?
Well, I think one is that you know you should, yeah, you should take a stance, an assumptive stance that if you are, located in a lot of these, repressive countries, and there's a whole list of them, that you should assume that the government has the capability, and likely, integration with network operators. And I'm not just saying mobile operators. I'm talking about, internet service providers as well. So when you're using services, and even something like Signal, and I'm not, I'm not pointing a finger at Signal at all, but you know, it's pretty easy to pick up the fact that somebody's using Signal, right? You can look at, well-known ports, and it's not rocket science to, configure DPI or be able to, analyze, well-known port values that are used for VPN and used for WhatsApp, Signal, and anything else. And those analytics can provide that, right, and start to profile you. So what you need to do is you need to be careful, you need to be thoughtful, about the apps that you use, and kind of put yourself in the shoes of the person that's surveilling you. It's like, well, what is going to raise suspicion? If you are using VPN 24/7, it is likely going to raise suspicion. If you are communicating on Signal 100% of the time, it will probably raise suspicion. And the last thing you want to be is, that person that is going to be, that person that they want to keep a watchful eye on, because that they have the capabilities of, of monitoring your location, quite simply. And even, if they want to, a mechanism to deploy, spyware. So, my guidance would be, try to protect yourself as much as possible. Understand that, your communication, might be monitored as well. And, kind of balance, the level of, encrypted traffic versus non-encrypted traffic. If you don't, you need to use a VPN 24/7, because some of the stuff is just, you're looking at news, quite simply. Is just be conscious of that, and start to sort of obfuscate, or anonymize some of your stuff, meaning you don't want to raise suspicion. You want to try to use services in a thoughtful way. And, I would probably, and use protection as much as possible, right? For the stuff that you do want to hide. Use VPNs, use WireGuard or TorGuard, or use, one of those, a little bit more secure Proton. And, and I'm not trying to advertise anything, but also, use, an antivirus client, like a Lookout's Imperium, or one of these. They all do a good job. I'm clearly, they don't block everything, but they do a good enough job to, protect against a lot of the really bad stuff out there. And that would be my suggestion.
You mentioned obfuscation. What about like technologies that are using it, like